What's up, everyone? Today, I am going to read the first book of a series of alien encounters and Earth's path to being a galactic superpower. The title is The Invasion of the Yes. How Earth finds a group of people who do what's necessary to remove the Yes from Earth. With the help of the Tip, they form a plan and help Earth remove the Yes. This helps Earth and that group of 7 become a galactic superpower. This is the first half of the book. The sun was an oppressive blaze overhead as Amy stirred, her face caked with sand and salt water. Her ears rang with the faint echo of chaos, metal twisting screams, the ocean roaring in rebellion. Her eyelids felt like lead as she struggled to focus, a dull ache pulsing through her body. "Rich," she croaked, the name cutting through the haze in her mind. A few feet away, Rich groaned, rolling onto his side. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with soot and grime. He pushed himself upright, blinking at the surreal scene before him. A jagged shoreline littered with debris, scraps of metal glinting under the relentless sun, suitcases and life vests strewn haphazardly. Waves lapped against the wreckage, their rhythm eerily calm in the wake of the disaster. "Amy!" Rich scrambled toward her, ignoring the protests of his own battered body. Relief flooded him as he saw her sit up, her green eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I'm okay," she said shakily, brushing strands of red-dyed hair from her face. I think I'm okay." They sat in stunned silence for a moment, surveying the remnants of the plane crash. Smoke curled into the sky from what remained of the fuselage, the scent of fuel sharp and acrid. Amy spotted a chunk of the tail section half submerged in the surf, its markings bearing the airline's logo. "Where are we?" Rich asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Amy replied, hugging her knees. "The last thing I remember is turbulence." And then she trailed off, shaking her head. Rich scanned the shoreline, his heart sinking. The island stretched out in all directions, a crescent of dense jungle rising beyond the beach. They could be anywhere within the vast Pacific, 1,000 miles of ocean, their only certainty. "Think anyone else made it?" Amy asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Rich admitted, "but we need to find out." The two rose unsteadily, leaning on each other for support. They began walking along the beach, calling out, their voices competing with the steady rhythm of the waves. Occasionally, they stumbled upon signs of life, a child's shoe, a torn scarf, but no one responded. Hours passed before they found the first survivor, a middle-aged man slumped against a piece of wreckage, his leg twisted unnaturally. His breath was shallow, but he was alive. Amy knelt beside him, checking his pulse while Rich scanned the jungle edge nervously. "This place feels untouched," Rich muttered, "like no one's ever set foot here." Amy nodded, her hands trembling as she tried to make the man comfortable. "We have to stay calm. Someone will come looking for us. The plane had hundreds of passengers. They'll send a rescue team." But Rich's eyes lingered on the horizon, where the vast ocean met the sky. 1,000 miles is a lot of ground to cover, he said. "We might need to help ourselves first." As night fell, the survivors lit a makeshift signal fire, the flames flickering against the encroaching darkness. Amy and Rich sat close together, their hands clasped tightly. The island's jungle whispered with unknown sounds, and the realization set in. Their survival depended on their ability to adapt, to find others, and to hope. Because in this vast, unfamiliar wilderness, hope was all they had. The days following the crash were a blur of exhaustion and uncertainty. The survivors, numbering more than 100, had spread out along the beach and into the jungle, each trying to make sense of their new reality. Supplies from the wreckage were gathered, scattered suitcases, first aid kits, and any intact food. But it was clear this wouldn't last long. If they were going to survive, they needed to rely on more than what had washed ashore. Amy and Rich found themselves gravitating toward the makeshift camp that had begun to take shape. Fires burned steadily now, offering warmth and light at night, and the wreckage was repurposed into rudimentary shelters. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Amy sat cross-legged on the sand, surrounded by a group of Taiwanese survivors who watched her intently. She had been a Mandarin Chinese teacher back in the States, but the tables had turned in this strange new world. Most of the passengers were from Taiwan, and now Amy was the one teaching, not Chinese, but English. "Repeat after me," she said, writing in the sand with a stick. The word water was etched in bold letters, its meaning as essential as its physical presence. "Water," the group echoed hesitantly. "Good," Amy encouraged, her green eyes softening as she gestured to the sea. "It's something we need to keep saying so everyone understands." She had initially felt overwhelmed. Why should language matter when survival was a priority? But then it became clear. Communication was critical. Without a shared language, tasks became chaotic and misunderstandings bred frustration. So she focused on practical words: fire, shelter, food, and tools. Her students, despite the grim circumstances, were eager to learn. Nearby, Rich had his own challenges. A small group of survivors gathered around him as he crouched over a salvaged tablet, prying its casing open with a piece of metal. As a software engineer, Rich's world had always revolved around coding and problem solving, but now he was forced to think differently. "Without power, this stuff is useless," he muttered, glancing at the island's towering palms. He had an idea, though. A solar panel scavenged from the wreckage could be repurposed to create a charging station. It wouldn't bring back the comforts of home, but it might power basic tools or radios if they found one intact. By the end of the first week, Rich had improvised a rudimentary water filtration system using plastic bottles and charcoal. It wasn't perfect, but it gave the survivors fresh water, reducing their reliance on coconuts and stagnant pools. "What next, MacGyver?" Amy teased one evening, sitting beside him as they stared into the campfire. Her red hair glowed, like embers in the firelight. "Not sure," Rich admitted. "There's so much to do. Building shelters, finding food sources. It feels like we're just scratching the surface." "You're doing more than most," Amy said. "People notice, Rich. They're grateful." "I guess," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "What about you? How's the teaching going?" Amy smiled faintly. "It's strange, isn't it? I spent years teaching Chinese, and now I'm an English teacher. Life has a funny way of turning things upside down." Rich chuckled. "Upside down is one way to put it. But honestly, you're amazing at it. Everyone's talking about how much they've learned already." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the camp. A group had returned from the jungle, carrying bundles of fruits and strange, spiky plants. One man, a botanist as it turned out, had identified several edible species and was teaching others how to forage safely. Another woman, a nurse, had set up a triage area and was treating injuries with whatever materials she could find. Slowly but surely, the camp began to transform into a community. Each person contributed based on their skills. Carpenters from construction sites built sturdy shelters, chefs managed food preparation, and engineers like Rich devised ways to make life more sustainable. Amy continued her language lessons, bridging the gap between cultures, while Rich's projects became the backbone of the camp's growing infrastructure. Despite the progress, the weight of uncertainty loomed over them all. Every night, Amy and Rich would gaze at the horizon, hoping to see the faint outline of a ship or the blinking lights of a rescue plane. But the ocean remained vast and empty. "We have to believe they'll find us," Amy said one night, her voice firm despite the doubt in her eyes. "They will," Rich replied, though he wasn't sure who he was convincing, her or himself. "But until then, we keep building." And build they did. As the days turned to weeks, the survivors turned their island into a testament to human resilience. What had started as chaos began to feel like a fragile new normal, held together by the skills, hope, and determination of everyone who had made it out alive. Chapter 3. Into the heart of the island. The mornings on the island had taken on a familiar rhythm. The survivors rose with the sun, dividing themselves into groups to tackle the day's tasks. Some stayed at the camp to tend the fire, prepare food, or improve their shelters. Others ventured into the jungle, searching for resources they desperately needed. Despite their progress, the growing unease among them was undeniable. Amy sat cross-legged outside her shelter, tying strips of fabric into a makeshift sling for carrying supplies. Her green eyes scanned the camp, watching as Rich prepared his small group for their latest trek inland. She couldn't ignore the tension that had settled over everyone like an invisible cloud. "Do you ever get the feeling," Amy began as Rich passed by her, "that we're not alone here?" Rich paused, a roll of salvaged rope slung over his shoulder. He met her gaze, his face shadowed with exhaustion but still thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted. "This place, it feels untouched but not uninhabited." Amy nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Maybe today we'll find something. A settlement, a sign of civilization. Anything." Rich crouched beside her, his hand brushing hers briefly. "We have to try. The supplies are running low, and the water source near camp won't last forever. If we don't find something soon, well, we'll make it work. We always do." Amy managed a faint smile, though her heart clenched with worry. As Rich stood and called out to his team, Amy glanced toward the jungle, its dense green canopy hiding whatever mysteries lay within. The group heading inland was a mix of the strongest and most determined survivors. Rich led the way, machete in hand, cutting through the underbrush with practiced efficiency. Behind him were a botanist named Wei, a young nurse named Clara, and two others whose endurance was as much an asset as their hope. The jungle was breathtakingly beautiful, with vibrant blooms of flowers cascading down trees and sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden beams. But it was also unforgiving. Thick roots threatened to trip the hikers, insects swarmed relentlessly, and the humidity clung to their skin like a second layer. Clara stumbled, her foot catching on a vine. "I thought I was in decent shape," she panted, brushing sweat-drenched hair from her face. "Turns out, triathlons don't prepare you for this." Rich turned back, offering her a hand. "None of us are used to this. Take a breather if you need to." "No," she said firmly, straightening. "I'm fine. Let's keep going." Wei knelt nearby, inspecting a cluster of strange red berries. "Edible," he announced after a moment, plucking one and tossing it into a bag. "Not much, but it'll help." The group pressed on, their conversation dwindling as the terrain grew steeper. Hours passed, their energy sapped by the relentless climb. Rich scanned the landscape, his sharp eyes picking out landmarks to mark their path back. A crooked tree here, a rock formation there. He couldn't afford to get them lost. They stopped at a small stream, its water trickling clear and cool. Rich crouched to refill their makeshift canteens, his fingers brushing the stone bed of the stream. For a moment, he thought he saw something glinting beneath the surface. Leaning closer, he pulled a small, rusted object from the water. "A belt buckle," he murmured, turning it over in his hands. The others gathered around, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Do you think it's from the plane?" Clara asked. Rich shook his head. "No, this looks older." Wei examined it closely, frowning. "Maybe someone else was here, a long time ago." The realization sent a ripple of unease through the group. If others had been here, what had happened to them? And if this island had been visited before, why was it still so isolated? Back at the camp, Amy sat with a smaller group, leading them in a lesson on basic English phrases. The Taiwanese survivors repeated after her, their voices steady despite their weariness. She felt a pang of pride at their determination, but couldn't shake the growing anxiety gnawing at her. When Rich's group returned hours later, their faces grim, Amy knew something was wrong. She hurried to meet them as they staggered into the clearing. Did you find anything? She asked, her voice tight. Rich held out the rusted belt buckle. This, and a stream. It's not much, but it's something. Amy turned the buckle over in her hands, her brows knitting together. This is odd. Do you think? Maybe someone lived here before, Rich said, his tone quiet. Or they passed through. Either way, we need to find more. The stream will help, but it's not enough. Amy felt a chill run down her spine, despite the heat. She glanced toward the jungle, its depths now more ominous than ever. The survivors needed hope, but they also needed answers. And she couldn't shake the feeling that those answers would come at a cost. As night fell, the camp settled into uneasy silence. The survivors lay beneath their shelters, the jungle alive with nocturnal sounds. Amy sat beside Rich by the fire, the belt buckle glinting between them. Tomorrow we'll go back, Rich said softly. We have to. Amy nodded, her resolve hardening. And we'll keep going until we find out the truth, whatever it is. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the starless sky. The survivors were adapting, becoming stronger. But the island remained a mystery, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. The climb had been grueling. Sweat poured down Rich's face as he hauled himself up the final stretch of rocky terrain, his muscles screaming in protest. Behind him, Clara and Way scrambled up, their faces etched with exhaustion. When they finally reached the summit, the group collapsed onto the hard stone, gulping for air. We made it, Clara panted, shielding her eyes as she looked out at the view. Finally, Rich stood, wiping his brow as he turned in a slow circle. The vista was breathtaking, the island stretching out in every direction. They could see the dense jungle, the shimmering ocean beyond it, and the crescent-shaped beach where their camp lay. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the scene. But as his gaze traveled farther, Rich froze. His breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest. Do you see that? He whispered. Way, kneeling beside a patch of wildflowers, looked up. His eyes followed Rich's line of sight, widening in disbelief. What is that? Encircling the island was a massive wall. It wasn't natural. Its jagged edges, weathered stone, and occasional metallic sheen spoke of something ancient yet deliberate. The wall varied in height, some sections towering so high they seemed to pierce the sky, while others dipped lower, but were still taller than the summit where Rich and his group now stood. Clara stepped forward, her mouth agape. It's the barrier. It's surrounding the entire island. Rich nodded slowly, his mind racing. This isn't just an island. It's a prison, or maybe a fortress. The wall stretched endlessly in all directions, following the island's contours with a precision that made it clear it had been constructed, not born of nature. Overgrown with moss and vines in some areas and starkly bare in others, it exuded an air of foreboding. Even at their vantage point, the highest on the island, it loomed above them, an imposing reminder of their isolation. How old do you think it is? Way asked, stepping closer to the edge. Rich squinted at the structure, noting its strange mix of materials. Some sections seemed to be carved from stone, while others glinted as though made from metal that had tarnished over time. Centuries, at least, he guessed. Maybe longer. Clara crossed her arms, her voice tinged with unease. But who would build something like this? And why? Rich had no answer. His mind raced with possibilities. Some ancient civilization, a secret government project, or even something alien. None of it made sense. What kind of force could construct such a massive structure and then abandon it? We're trapped, Clara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Rich shook his head. We don't know that yet. There could be a way out. We need to figure out what we're dealing with. Way crouched down, tracing a line in the dirt. If the wall encircles the entire island, it means two things. One, someone wanted to keep people or something out or in. And two, This island is no accident. The weight of Way's words hung heavy in the air. Rich's mind turned to the survivors back at camp. How would they react to this discovery? Would it spark hope or despair? The group lingered at the summit, studying the wall and the terrain below. They spotted what appeared to be a gap in the jungle, where the wall dipped slightly. It wasn't close, but it could be reachable. Rich pointed it out to the others. "If we're going to investigate, that's where we start," he said firmly. Clara frowned. "Investigate? Rich, this isn't just some broken piece of tech we can tinker with. That thing is massive. What if it's dangerous?" "Everything here is dangerous," Rich replied. "But if we don't find answers, we're just sitting ducks." Wayne nodded in agreement. He's right. We need to understand this place if we're going to survive. The group began their descent, carefully marking their trail with scratches on rocks and tied strips of fabric. The trek back to camp was slower, their minds burdened with what they had seen. When they finally emerged from the jungle, the other survivors rushed to meet them, their faces eager for news. Amy was among the first to reach Rich, her green eyes scanning his face. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. Rich hesitated, glancing at the crowd gathering around them. He knew their discovery would change everything. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "There's a wall," he said. "A massive one. It surrounds the entire island." The murmurs began immediately, spreading like wildfire through the group. Some survivors looked confused, others fearful. Amy's brow furrowed as she processed his words. "A wall?" she repeated. "Like man-made?" Rich nodded. "It's old, but it's no accident. Someone built it, and it's taller than anything here, even the summit." Amy's lips pressed into a thin line. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet," Rich admitted, "but we found a section that might be easier to reach. I think it's worth investigating." The camp erupted into debate, voices rising as everyone shared their theories and fears. Amy placed a hand on Rich's arm, grounding him amid the chaos. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady. "We have to." Rich nodded, though the weight of the discovery sat heavy on his shoulders. The wall was a mystery, but it was also a challenge, a reminder that their survival wasn't just about finding food and water. It was about uncovering the truth of the island and the forces that had brought them there. As Rich explained the sheer scale of the structure and its distance from the island, the survivors quickly realized the gravity of their situation. The wall wasn't just a mystery. It was a challenge that might hold the key to their survival or their doom. "You're saying it's 25 miles out?" Amy asked, her voice heavy with disbelief. She sat beside Rich by the campfire, her green eyes reflecting the flickering flames. That's impossible to swim." Rich nodded grimly. "It's not just the distance. We don't know what's in the water. Currents, predators, who knows? If we're going to reach it, we'll need a boat." The camp was silent except for the crackling of the fire. The survivors had gathered to hear Rich's report, their faces illuminated in the dim light. The wall had become a symbol of something larger than their predicament, a beacon of hope or a harbinger of doom. But first, it was a logistical nightmare, the challenge of building a boat. The next morning, the survivors held a meeting to discuss their options. Rich stood at the center of the group, a stick in his hand as he sketched plans in the sand. "We have 2 priorities," he began. 1. Build a boat capable of carrying at least 5 or 6 people. 2. Stock it with enough food and water for the journey." "But we're already low on supplies," Clara interjected. "If we take that much from the camp, what happens to the rest of us?" "That's why this has to be a team effort," Amy said, stepping in to calm the rising tension. "We can't think of this as just sending a few people to the wall. This is about finding out what's beyond it for all of us." The group murmured in agreement, though the worry on their faces was palpable. Resources were scarce, and building a seaworthy vessel would require time they didn't have. Scavenging and improvisation, the camp sprang into action. Under Rich's guidance, They scavenged every usable material from the wreckage and the jungle. Pieces of the airplane fuselage were repurposed for the hull, while palm fibers were twisted into sturdy ropes. Amy organized a foraging group to gather additional food and water, ensuring the rest of the camp wouldn't go without while the boat project consumed their attention. "This'll work," Rich muttered to himself as he hammered a piece of metal into shape. His hands were blistered, his body aching, but he couldn't stop. Every hour spent working on the boat was an hour closer to the answers they desperately needed. Amy joined him during the afternoons, helping lash pieces of wood together or patch holes with melted plastic. Despite the grueling labor, she found solace in their shared purpose. "We're really doing this," she said one evening, her voice laced with both amazement and apprehension. "We have to," Rich replied. "We don't have a choice." The urgency of departure. As the days passed, the survivors grew increasingly aware of the ticking clock. The camp's resources were dwindling faster than they could replenish them. The once plentiful streams were drying up, and the jungle's edible plants were becoming harder to find. Every day felt heavier, as though the island itself was pressing down on them. "We needed to leave yesterday," Wei muttered during a meeting, echoing the unspoken sentiment shared by the group. "The longer we stay here, the worse it gets." Rich and Amy exchanged a look. They knew he was right. The boat, still incomplete, was their only hope of reaching the wall before their situation became dire. "Another 2 days," Rich said finally. "If we can push through, we can have it ready by then." A community on edge. The strain began to show among the survivors. Tempers flared as people argued over priorities, whether to conserve resources or push for the wall. Amy spent much of her time mediating disputes, her role as a teacher evolving into that of a counselor. She encouraged the group to focus on the bigger picture, even as doubts gnawed at her own resolve. "What if the wall doesn't have the answers we're looking for?" Clara asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Amy hesitated, staring at the dark jungle beyond the firelight. "Then at least we'll know we tried," she said. "But sitting here doing nothing, that's not an option." The final push. On the morning of the 3rd day, the survivors gathered around the nearly finished boat. It was crude but sturdy, a patchwork of metal, wood, and ingenuity. Rich ran his hands along the edges, checking for weak points. "It's not perfect," he admitted, "but it'll get us there." Amy placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steadying. "That's all we need." The group worked tirelessly to load the boat with supplies: dried fruit, coconuts, and water stored in salvaged plastic bottles. A small, makeshift sail was hoisted, its fabric stitched together from torn clothes and parachute material. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the survivors stood in silence, staring at their creation. The boat wasn't just a vessel. It was a symbol of their determination to face the unknown. Tomorrow, the journey to the wall would begin. For better or worse, they were leaving behind the safety of the camp and venturing into uncharted waters. The wall loomed in their minds, an enigma as vast as the ocean surrounding them. "Do you think we'll make it?" Amy asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Rich didn't answer immediately. He stared at the dark sea, his jaw tightening. "We'll make it," he said finally. "We have to." The camp settled into an uneasy sleep, the promise of the journey ahead hanging heavy in the air. The wall awaited, its secrets hidden behind 25 miles of treacherous water. But for Rich, Amy, and the survivors, the time for questions had passed. Tomorrow, they would find the answers or die trying. Chapter 6. Arrival at the wall. The sun had barely risen when Rich, Amy, and their 5 companions pushed the boat into the gentle waves. The camp stood behind them in solemn silence, the remaining survivors watching from the shore. This wasn't just a journey for answers. It was a journey for survival. The wall was a beacon of hope and mystery, and no one knew what awaited them. Rich steered the boat with makeshift paddles, the salty spray clinging to his face as the wind filled their patchwork sail. Amy sat nearby, her green eyes fixed on the horizon. The wall had been a distant shadow from the summit of the mountain, but as they approached, it grew larger and more imposing. Hours passed. The ocean around them shifted from serene to restless, the currents tugging at their vessel. The group took turns paddling, their muscles burning as they pushed closer. Slowly, the wall began to dominate their view, its towering height dwarfing everything around it. "It's massive," Clara whispered, craning her neck to look upward. "How tall do you think it is?" Rich shook his head, his voice tight with awe. "At least 20,000 feet, maybe more." Amy's breath hitched as she stared at the wall. Why would anyone build something like this? What could they possibly be trying to keep out or in? The group fell silent, each lost in their thoughts. Questions swirled in their minds. Had their plane crashed into the wall? Was this structure the reason they were stranded here? And most unsettling of all, what lay beyond it? The shoreline. As the boat drifted closer, they noticed a narrow strip of sand nestled against the base of the wall. It wasn't much, a small crescent-shaped beach barely wide enough to accommodate them. But it would do. Rich guided the boat onto the sand, and the group scrambled out, pulling it ashore to ensure it wouldn't drift away. The wall loomed above them, an unyielding monolith of stone and metal. Its surface was weathered, streaked with moss and rust, but it bore no seams or breaks. It seemed to rise endlessly, disappearing into the clouds above. "This thing is ancient," Wei muttered, running his hand over the rough surface. "But the engineering, it's beyond anything I've ever seen." Amy turned to Rich, her voice low. "What now?" "We camp here for the night," Rich replied. "It's too late to start exploring, and we need rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out a way to scale this, or find an opening." Nightfall, the group set up a modest camp on the narrow beach, building a small fire from driftwood and salvage supplies. The wall's shadow stretched far into the sea, its presence oppressive and surreal. As they ate their meager dinner, the conversation turned to speculation. "Maybe it's a containment wall," Clara suggested, "to keep something dangerous on this island." "Or to keep people out," Wei countered. "Whatever's beyond it might be something worth hiding." Rich poked at the fire with a stick, his mind racing. "I keep thinking about the plane," he said. "We were descending when it happened, then the crash, the damage. What if we hit this thing? It would explain why the wreckage was so fragmented. But why build it so tall?" Amy asked. "This isn't just a barrier. It's a statement." No one had an answer. Theories swirled, but the wall refused to give up its secrets. The weight of the unknown. As night deepened, the group settled into uneasy sleep. The wall towered over them, its surface faintly illuminated by the moonlight. The rhythmic crash of waves against the sand was the only sound, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped them. Rich lay on his back, staring up at the wall. His thoughts were a jumble of fear, curiosity, and determination. He reached out, his fingers brushing Amy's hand beside him. She stirred, her green eyes opening to meet his. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. Amy nodded, though her expression was troubled. "I just hope we're ready for what we find." Morning at the wall. When dawn broke, it revealed the wall in even greater detail. Its surface was a patchwork of materials, stone, metal, and something else that none of them could identify. Rich traced the edge of a strange, smooth section that seemed almost like glass, but it was impervious to touch or force. "There has to be a way in," he said, his voice steady but insistent. "Whoever built this didn't make it solid all the way through. We'll find an entrance or make one." The group packed their camp, readying themselves for the day ahead. Anxiety hung heavy in the air, but so did a spark of hope. The wall was their obstacle, their enigma, their purpose. Chapter 7. The Endless Wall. The morning came quietly, the waves lapping against the narrow strip of sand where the 7 survivors had made camp. The towering wall loomed above them, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was as if the wall itself were alive, a silent guardian refusing to divulge its secrets. Rich stood at the edge of the camp, staring at the wall as the others stirred behind him. His mind churned with questions, but the wall provided no answers. Every inch of its surface seemed deliberately impenetrable, devoid of markings, doors, or any indication of its purpose. Still, he knew they had to keep searching. "Wake up, everyone," Rich called. "We've got a long day ahead." Amy stretched and sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Do you think today will be different?" she asked, pulling on her shoes. "It has to be," Rich said, though the doubt in his voice was hard to miss. The endless walk. The group set out along the beach, the wall their constant companion on one side, and the open ocean on the other. The terrain remained monotonous: sand, small clusters of rocks, and the unyielding face of the wall. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the salt air stung their faces. They stopped occasionally to drink from their dwindling water supply or share a few bites of food. Wei ran his hands over the wall as they walked, searching for any irregularity. "It's like it was meant to be seamless," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "No gaps, no openings, nothing to suggest it can be breached." Clara, trailing behind, squinted up at the massive structure. "It's more than just tall, it's overwhelming. Whoever built this, they wanted to make a statement." Amy walked beside Rich, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We could walk for days and still not find anything," she said quietly. "I know," Rich admitted, "but we can't stop now. There has to be something, an entrance, a clue, anything." The search continues. Hours passed, the group growing quieter as exhaustion set in. The unchanging landscape felt oppressive, the wall's presence almost mocking in its impenetrability. They tried to keep their spirits up, but the endless march was taking its toll. "We should take a break," Clara suggested, her voice strained. "We're not going to get anywhere if we wear ourselves out." Rich checked the sun's position, noting how far it had sunk toward the horizon. "You're right," he said. "We'll find a place to camp soon." It wasn't long before they stumbled upon a small outcrop of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. The beach widened slightly here, giving them enough space to set up their makeshift tents. They gathered driftwood for a fire, its flames a small comfort against the encroaching night. Second night by the wall. As they ate their sparse dinner, the group reflected on the day's fruitless search. Frustration bubbled beneath the surface, but no one wanted to voice it. Instead, they focused on the fire, the crackling flames filling the silence. "Do you think it goes on forever?" Wei finally asked, breaking the quiet. Rich shook his head. "Nothing goes on forever. There has to be an end or a purpose." Amy poked at the fire with a stick, her thoughts elsewhere. If the wall was meant to keep something in or out, what does that mean for us? Did we crash here by accident, or were we meant to be here? Her words hung heavy in the air, the unspoken fears of the group finally brought to light. Clara sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. "Whatever the reason, we're here now. We just have to figure out what to do about it." Rich stared into the flames, his jaw tightening. "Tomorrow we keep going. The answers are out there. We just haven't found them yet." The group settled in for the night, the wall's shadow a looming presence as they drifted into uneasy sleep. Somewhere along its length, there had to be something, anything, that would explain its existence. But for now, the wall remained an enigma, silent and unyielding. Chapter 8. Into the Wall. The sun burned low in the sky, its golden light spilling across the narrow beach as the group prepared to make their final push. Rich stood facing the group, his expression solemn but determined. "Today's the day," he said. "If we don't find something soon, we'll have to head back to the island tomorrow. Supplies are running low, and it's a 3-day walk back to the boat." No one argued. The group of 7 was tired, their bodies worn from days of endless walking, but there was a shared sense of resolve. They had come this far, and no one wanted to leave empty-handed. The Discovery. They set out as they had the past 2 days, following the wall's unyielding face. Sand stretched before them in endless monotony, the wall's sheer scale making them feel impossibly small. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps and the distant hiss of waves. Then, just past midday, Way suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Look," he shouted, pointing ahead. The group froze, turning to see what had caught his attention. Rising out of the wall was a massive entrance, half-oval in shape, its edges carved with strange, smooth precision. The opening was enormous, large enough to drive 2 semi-trucks side by side without grazing the sides. "What is that?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling with awe. Rich approached cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest. "An entrance," he said, though it was more of a guess than an answer. He turned back to the group. "We didn't come all this way to stand outside. Let's see what's inside." No one spoke, but their determination carried them forward. Together, the 7 of them crossed the threshold into the wall. The room beyond. The air changed the moment they stepped inside. Cooler, stiller, and somehow heavier. The massive room before them was unlike anything they had ever seen. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into shadows, and strange light, soft, white, and otherworldly, glowed faintly from hidden recesses in the walls. Everywhere they looked, there were strange structures and shapes. Smooth pillars reached up like frozen waterfalls, and angular patterns etched into the floor pulsed faintly as though alive. Doors lined the walls, massive, metallic doors that seemed sealed tight. And in the center of the room stood a colossal spiral staircase, wide enough for an entire crowd, winding upward into the unseen heights of the wall. This isn't natural," Wei said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like something out of a dream." "Or a nightmare," Clara muttered, eyeing the room warily. Rich ran a hand along one of the massive pillars, feeling its cold, glass-like surface. "This place isn't abandoned," he said. "It's dormant." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but Rich turned to face the staircase. "We need to see what's at the top." The climb began with hesitant steps, each survivor marveling at the vast, spiraling structure. The staircase was solid, perfectly smooth beneath their feet, and strangely easy to climb despite its towering height. But the hours wore on and exhaustion set in. "How tall is this thing?" Clara groaned, leaning against the central railing, her legs trembling. 20,000 feet, Amy said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But we've already come so far. If we stop now..." Rich nodded, turning back to the group. "Just a little further. There's got to be something up there, a reason this place exists." They pressed on, the spiral narrowing slightly as they climbed higher. Hours passed, and the faint glow of the strange lights never dimmed. It was impossible to tell whether it was day or night outside. Finally, they reached a landing. A massive window stretched across the wall, offering a view out into the endless void beyond. The group paused to catch their breath, gazing out the window. From their vantage point, they could see nearly 3/4 of the wall's height, the ocean stretching endlessly below. The island was barely visible in the distance, a tiny green surrounded by shimmering blue. "We're so high up," Wei murmured. "It's unreal." Rich pressed his hands against the glass, his mind spinning. "Another 3 hours and we'll reach the top," he said. "We can't stop now." The summit. Motivated by Rich's determination, the group climbed on, each step bringing them closer to the summit. Exhaustion clawed at them, but the thought of reaching the top kept their feet moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged onto a massive open platform. The staircase ended abruptly, and before them lay a surface unlike anything they had ever seen. The top of the wall stretched out like an endless plain, smooth and pristine, glowing faintly beneath the starlit sky. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The cool wind whipped around them, carrying the faint scent of salt and earth. It was dark, but even in the moonlight, they could see that the top of the wall was no ordinary structure. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, glowing faintly with a soft, bluish light. In the distance, enormous spires rose up, their shapes alien and breathtaking. Amy pulled herself up and stared at Rich. This isn't just a wall. It's something else. Rich nodded, his face a mix of awe and confusion. It's a creation beyond anything we've ever seen. Too tired to explore further, the group spread out across the platform, lying down to rest beneath the stars. The mysteries of the wall loomed over them, but for now, they could only sleep. Tomorrow, they would uncover its secrets or be consumed by them. As Rich drifted off, his thoughts were a jumble of wonder and fear. What kind of place had they found? Who or what had built this colossal structure? And most importantly, what lay beyond? Chapter 9. Into the Unknown. The morning sun broke across the top of the wall, its golden rays scattering across the endless, smooth surface. Rich stirred awake, blinking against the light. For a moment, he forgot where they were, the sheer surrealism of their location overwhelming him. Then it came back. The climb, the massive structure, the questions without answers. Amy sat nearby, her back against the cool surface of the wall, staring at the horizon. The others began to rouse, groaning as they stretched aching limbs. Despite the magnificence of where they stood, the weight of their reality settled in quickly. "We're a day short on food now," Clara said, her voice strained as she pulled out the dwindling supplies. "We planned for this trip to be short. If we don't figure something out, we're in trouble." Rich stood and surveyed the landscape, or lack thereof. The top of the wall was impossibly vast, smooth except for the glowing symbols and occasional massive spires stretching upward into the sky. It was flat, endless, and utterly lifeless. There were no trees, no fruit-bearing plants, no animals, just a strange and unnatural silence. "We can't turn back yet," Rich said firmly. "We didn't come all this way just to give up." Amy looked up at him, her face showing equal parts worry and resolve. "I agree. There has to be something here. Some clue. Some way to understand what this place is." Rich turned to the others. "Let's keep moving. If this wall really did rise out of the ground during our flight, there has to be a purpose, a mechanism, something that explains it." Wayne nodded in agreement, though his face was pale with exhaustion. "It doesn't make sense otherwise. Something this colossal doesn't just exist. It does something." The exploration. The group gathered their supplies, now reduced to a few bottles of water and scraps of dried fruit and coconut. They didn't speak much as they set off across the wall, the sheer scale of it making them feel small and insignificant. They walked for hours, following a straight path marked by the faint, glowing symbols embedded in the ground. Rich led the way, his steps determined despite the growing tension in the air. Every now and then, one of them would pause to inspect the symbols, tracing them with their fingers, but they remained incomprehensible patterns without meaning. "Does it ever end?" Clara asked, her voice echoing slightly in the still air. "It has to," Rich replied, though even he was beginning to doubt himself. As they walked, Amy fell into step beside him. "Do you really think the wall shot out of the ground during the crash?" Rich glanced at her, his face unreadable. "It's the only thing that makes sense. Think about it. One moment we're flying, the next we're hurtling toward the ocean. The plane didn't hit mountains or trees. Something catastrophic happened, something impossible. This wall didn't just exist before. It appeared." Amy exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. "But how? What could cause something like this?" "That's what we need to figure out," Rich said quietly. The first discovery. Hours passed, their footsteps the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Just as the group began to despair, Way suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. "Look, over there." Rich squinted into the distance. A dark shape loomed on the horizon, something different from the smooth, unbroken plane they'd been traversing. Their pace quickened, hope sparking in their tired bodies. When they finally reached it, they found an enormous structure embedded in the wall. It resembled a massive door, but it wasn't like any door they'd ever seen. It was circular, rising over 50 feet tall, its surface carved with intricate patterns that glowed faintly, pulsing with a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. "What is this?" Clara whispered, stepping forward. Rich approached the door cautiously, placing his hand against its cool surface. "It's some kind of entryway," he said, his voice filled with awe. "But into what?" Amy stood beside him, her green eyes wide as she traced one of the glowing patterns. What if this leads to the other side of the wall? The idea sent chills through the group. For the first time, the wall felt less like an obstacle and more like a gateway to something greater, something terrifying and unknown. The door responds. Rich pushed against the door, but it didn't budge. He stepped back, frustrated. There's got to be a way to open this. Wei knelt beside the base of the door, inspecting the glowing patterns more closely. "It's responding to something," he said suddenly. "Do you see the light? It's pulsing faster when you touch it." Rich frowned and stepped forward again, placing both hands on the surface. As he did, the patterns began to glow brighter, the pulsing rhythm quickening. The ground beneath them vibrated faintly, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The group stumbled back, their hearts pounding. The door shuddered, and with a sound like grinding stone, it began to move. Slowly, it slid inward, revealing an opening beyond. A cold, blue light spilled out from the entrance, illuminating the group's awestruck faces. Beyond the threshold was a vast, cavernous space filled with strange machinery and structures, columns of light, rotating rings suspended in midair, and a low hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. Rich turned to the others, his voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "We found it." Amy swallowed hard, staring into the strange, impossible chamber beyond. "What is this place?" Wei shook his head, his eyes wide. "It's not human. That much is clear." The next step, the group stood at the threshold, staring into the glowing expanse. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and exhaustion weighed on their limbs, but none of them could turn back now. They had come too far, uncovered too much. "This is why we're here," Rich said, his voice resolute. "Whatever this place is, it holds the answers." Amy stepped up beside him, her gaze fixed on the alien structures beyond. "And we're going to find them." Together, the group crossed into the chamber, leaving behind the world they knew. The door slid shut behind them with a thundering finality, sealing them within the heart of the wall. Chapter 10. The Other Side. The chamber's strange blue glow faded behind them as the group emerged into what could only be described as a viewing room. The space was vast and eerily quiet, its walls seamlessly curving around them, leading to a massive window that stretched the entire length of the room. Rich, Amy, and the others froze as they took in what lay beyond. The other side of the wall was not the ocean they had imagined. What is that?" Amy whispered, her voice trembling. The sight before them defied logic and expectation. An alien-like landscape stretched into infinity, a colossal, unnatural fortress unlike anything human hands had ever built. It sprawled across the earth like a living machine, a network of impossibly intricate structures, sharp-edged towers rising from the ground, glowing lines of energy weaving across the terrain like veins in a body. It pulsed with purpose, vibrating faintly, as though the land itself were alive. Massive cranes, machines with segmented arms, and rotating rings dominated the horizon. Gigantic swaths of land were stripped bare and being reshaped. The very ground beneath it was shifting, transformed into something unrecognizable. Strange spires pierced the skies, anchoring unseen forces as clouds swirled unnaturally above. Rivers of glowing liquid carved new paths through the terrain. "This isn't Earth," Clara muttered, her face pale. "It was Earth," Rich corrected, though his voice wavered with disbelief. "They're changing it." Way stepped closer to the glass, his hands trembling against its smooth surface. "It's terraforming," he said softly. "They're terraforming the planet." The group fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Terraformation. The process of transforming a world into something habitable, livable. But for what? And who? And why had it come so suddenly? The humans at work. Movement caught Amy's eye. She squinted through the massive window, her breath hitching. "Oh my God, look!" Scattered across the alien fortress, far below, were people. Thousands, tens of thousands of them. They moved in unison, laboring beneath the shadow of the colossal machines. They were small, almost insignificant against the scale of what they were building, but they were undeniably human. "People are working down there," Clara said in disbelief. "Those are humans. They're building this, whatever this is." "They're not resisting," Way observed, his voice low. "It's like they're programmed or brainwashed. Look at the way they move." Amy clutched Rich's arm, her heart racing. What happened to them? To the world? How could this happen so fast? Rich's jaw tightened as he stared at the impossible scene unfolding below. The wall. It must have gone up to protect the rest of us while this was happening, to shield us from whatever is going on here. But why protect us? Amy asked. If they're terraforming the Earth, why leave some of us alive? Why not just get rid of us? No one had an answer. The horrifying realization. Clara sank to the floor, her head in her hands. This can't be real. It doesn't make sense. The wall just appeared out of nowhere. The plane, the crash. It's like we were trapped here intentionally. Rich turned from the window, his mind racing. It's not just a wall, it's the timing. This was planned. This was orchestrated. Whatever this is, it's been in motion for longer than we can imagine. Amy shook her head. By who? By what? This isn't human. None of this is. Rich gestured toward the window. It doesn't matter who built it. What matters is that the world we knew is gone. That's the truth we have to face. Way looked back toward the vast alien fortress. And those people down there, what happened to them? Were they taken? Were they chosen? How did they end up on the other side of this wall? The room fell silent again. Each member of the group stared at the alien landscape beyond, grappling with the enormity of what they were seeing. The world, their world, was being dismantled and remade into something they couldn't begin to understand. The wall's purpose. As they stood there, the pieces began to fall into place. The wall hadn't just appeared to imprison them or isolate them. It was a barrier, shielding those who remained from the devastation happening on the other side. The terraforming, whether by aliens, machines, or something else, was methodical and unstoppable. This isn't about survival, Amy said softly, breaking the silence. It's about transition. They're changing Earth, and the wall keeps us out of it. Rich nodded slowly. Or keeps it out of our side until it's done. And then what? Clara asked, her voice shaking. What happens to us? No one had an answer. What comes next? The group sat down in silence, their bodies and minds overwhelmed by what they had discovered. The sun outside was sinking again, casting strange, golden shadows across the alien fortress. The pulse of the machines, the hum of energy, it all seemed endless, unstoppable. Amy leaned her head against the glass, staring out at the vast, incomprehensible work of transformation. What do we do now? She asked softly. Rich's face was resolute as he turned to the group. We find answers. We figure out why this is happening, who's behind it, and, most importantly, if there's a way to stop it. And if we can't, Way asked quietly, then we find a way to survive, Rich said. We owe that much to the rest of the world. the ones who weren't lucky enough to see this. The group fell silent, staring at the alien horizon as night began to fall. The massive machines below worked tirelessly, reshaping the Earth, while the wall around them stood as an unyielding reminder of their isolation and their ignorance. Tomorrow, they would explore further, delve deeper into the mysteries of the wall and the fortress beyond. The truth was still out there, hidden among the ruins of the old world and the beginnings of the new. Chapter 11. The Control Case. The room was quiet. The group huddled together as Rich pieced through the events that had led them here. But before anyone could act further, Claire began to stumble, clutching her stomach with a look of pain that silenced everyone. "Claire, what's wrong?" Amy rushed to her side, gripping her arms to steady her. Claire's face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead. I don't know. It's like something inside me is changing. My body, it's not mine anymore." Her voice cracked, and she sank to the floor, her breathing shallow and panicked. Rich knelt beside her, his expression tense. "This doesn't make sense. None of us have been exposed to anything that should." Amy interrupted, her voice sharp. "Rich, her symptoms. We've seen this before. The crash and those workers we saw down below. Do you think?" "Transformation," Wei whispered, backing away slightly. "Like, what's happening on the other side of the wall? It's not just the land. It's us." Rich turned his gaze to Claire, his jaw clenching. "No," he said firmly. "She wasn't supposed to be affected. She's the control case. Whatever's happening to the others, whatever this place is doing to people, she was supposed to be immune." Amy frowned. "Control case? Rich, what are you talking about?" Rich hesitated before answering, his voice low. "Before the crash, I was working on something. A serum. It was experimental, designed to resist environmental and genetic manipulation. Claire was injected with it after the crash. I thought it would protect her, isolate her from whatever this place is doing." Amy's eyes widened in shock. "You experimented on her without telling anyone?" "I didn't have a choice," Rich said, his voice growing desperate. "It wasn't supposed to come to this. She was stable. She was fine until now." The serum's purpose. Ethan, silent until now, stepped forward. "What's happening to her isn't natural, and if this place is terraforming the world, including us, then your serum might be our only hope." He opened the med kit he had been carrying and pulled out a vial, its contents shimmering faintly. "This is it, isn't it? The serum?" Rich nodded, his expression grim. "It's the last dose. I was working on refining it when the crash happened. I don't know if it's enough to stop whatever's happening to Claire, but it's all we have." Amy looked at Claire, who was writhing on the ground, her body trembling, as though something beneath her skin was fighting to emerge. "We have to try," Amy said. "We can't lose her." Ethan carefully drew the serum into a syringe, his hand steady despite the tension in the room. He knelt beside Claire, meeting her eyes. "This might hurt," he said softly, "but it's our best shot." Claire nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "Do it." The injection. Ethan administered the injection, pressing the plunger down as the serum entered Claire's system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body arched violently, a scream ripping from her throat as veins darkened along her skin, pulsing with an unnatural light. "Hold her!" Rich shouted, and Amy and Wei rushed to keep Claire still as her convulsions grew stronger. The room seemed to hum with energy, the glowing symbols on the walls flickering erratically. "What's happening to her?" Clara cried, her voice breaking. Rich watched in horror, helpless. "It's the serum. It's fighting back. It's trying to reverse whatever's happening to her." Suddenly, Claire went still. Her body slackened, her breathing ragged but steady. The glow beneath her skin faded, and the room's strange hum subsided. "Claire," Amy whispered, brushing hair from her face. "Can you hear me?" Claire's eyes fluttered open, their pupils briefly flashing an unnatural silver before returning to normal. She stared at Amy, her voice weak but clear. It worked. I think it worked. A revelation. As the group sat back, catching their breath, Wei spoke up. Rich, you said Claire was a control case. But why her? And why didn't you tell us? Rich hesitated before answering, his voice heavy. Because I didn't know what this place was going to do to us. I thought if I could create someone immune to it, I could find a way to protect the rest of us. But now, I think I underestimated what we're up against. Amy shook her head, her frustration and fear boiling over. You knew something like this could happen, and you didn't tell us? We've been walking blind into this nightmare. Rich met her gaze, his expression pained. I didn't know it would go this far, but now we know. Whatever's happening on the other side of this wall, it's not just changing the Earth, it's changing us. And if we don't figure out why, none of us are getting out of here alive. The group fell silent, the weight of Rich's words settling over them like a shroud. Claire sat up slowly, her strength returning, though her expression was haunted. I saw something, she said softly. When it was happening, flashes of machines, of people working. They weren't themselves. It's like they were being used. Amy's voice was steady but cold. Used for what? Claire shook her head. I don't know. But I think this place, this wall, this fortress, it's not here to protect us. It's here to contain us. The realization sent chills through the group. The wall wasn't just a barrier. It was part of something much larger, much darker. And the answers they sought might not be the salvation they hoped for, but a revelation they weren't ready. Chapter 12. A Choice for Humanity. The air atop the wall grew thinner with every step. The group of 7 trudged forward, each breath a struggle as the high altitude sapped their energy. Whether it was the altitude alone or the effects of the transformation seeping into their bodies, none of them could tell. All they knew was that their situation was growing increasingly desperate. Rich scanned the horizon, his eyes squinting against the bright light reflecting off the smooth surface of the wall. No food, no shelter, nothing but puddles of water left by the passing clouds. They had no choice but to drink it, their thirst outweighing the risks. Amy, walking beside him, stopped suddenly. Rich, do you feel that? He turned to her, his brow furrowed. Feel what? Like we're being watched. The encounter. The group didn't have to wonder for long. The atmosphere shifted, a subtle vibration in the air, a hum that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. A figure emerged ahead, materializing as though stepping through a veil. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Its metallic skin shimmered with hues of silver and blue, and its eyes glowed faintly with a piercing white light. Intricate patterns covered its body, pulsing like veins of energy. The entity's presence was both imposing and mesmerizing. It stood calmly, watching them with an expression that was neither threatening nor welcoming. What are you? Rich managed, his voice hoarse. The entity inclined its head slightly. When it spoke, its voice resonated in their minds more than in the air, calm and steady. I am of the Tassis Interplanetary, TIP, as you may call us. My purpose here is to aid you in freeing your planet from the Yes. The Yes? Amy asked, her voice trembling. Who are they? Are they the ones terraforming the Earth? Yes, the TIP replied. The Yes are an invasive species. They travel from planet to planet, converting worlds into ecosystems suited to their kind. They do not seek coexistence. They do not negotiate. They reshape and dominate, assimilating life to serve their needs. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Rich stepped forward. And what about you? Why are you here? The TIP paused, as though considering its response. My people have monitored Earth for some time. You are at a turning point in your evolution, one that has drawn the attention of forces both good and ill. The Yes have chosen this moment to strike, hoping to conquer you before you can rise. I was sent alone to intervene, to assist your species in defeating them. Why help us? Wei asked skeptically. Why not let us fall? Because your planet holds potential unlike any other, the tip said, its glowing eyes focusing intently. You stand on the brink of joining the galaxy's superpowers. If you succeed in overcoming the Yes, you will take your place among the stars, not as slaves, but as equals. The choice? The tip gestured toward the alien fortress visible beyond the wall, its vast machinery continuing its relentless transformation of the Earth. The Yes offer you a choice: ascend as a superpower or become subservient to them. They leave no room for neutrality. Amy's voice trembled as she spoke. How do we fight them? We don't even understand what they are. The tip extended its hands, and a holographic map of the Earth appeared in the air before them. Points of light marked locations around the globe where the Yes terraforming efforts were concentrated. Their weakness lies in their over-reliance on central hubs to power their technology. Destroy these hubs, and their systems will collapse. Rich studied the map, his mind racing. And then what? Once we defeat them? Then Earth will have proven its readiness, the tip replied. You will no longer be seen as a backwater planet. Your species will be invited into the Galactic fold, joining a league of civilizations that span many galaxies. Wei's eyes narrowed. And if we fail? Failure means subjugation, the tip said simply. The Yes will not stop. They will assimilate your planet, your people, and your culture into their hive. You will become tools, not allies. The decision. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of the decision crushing them. Just days ago, they had been ordinary people, survivors of a plane crash, struggling to make sense of an alien wall in a changed world. Now they were faced with a choice that would determine the fate of humanity. We don't have a choice, do we? Amy said finally, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. We fight. Rich nodded, his resolve hardening. We fight. For the planet. For everyone who can't fight for themselves. The tip inclined its head again, as if in approval. Then I will guide you. Together, we will dismantle the Yes hold on your world. But know this. The path ahead will not be easy. You must act quickly. Every moment lost strengthens their hold. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. If we do this, what happens to us? The 7 of us? You will be seen as the leaders of this world, the tip said, its glowing eyes scanning each of them in turn. Your names will echo across galaxies. You will be remembered as the ones who led Earth to its place among the stars. The enormity of the tip's words sank in, but there was no turning back. The 7 survivors had been thrust into a battle they hadn't chosen, but now they carried the hopes of the entire planet and its future on their shoulders. Then let's get to work, Rich said, stepping toward the tip. We've got a planet to save. Chapter 13. The Plan. Rich sat across from the tip, his mind struggling to keep pace with the revelations unfolding before him. The alien's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through him, its calm voice filling the room as it outlined the path to humanity's salvation. We have analyzed your planet's defensive capabilities for decades, the tip said, its tone devoid of arrogance, merely stating facts. Your species possesses a technology required to neutralize the Yes threat. It is crude but sufficient. Rich leaned forward, his brow furrowed. You're telling me we already have what we need to stop them? Yes, the tip replied. The Yes terraforming systems rely on 4 central hubs strategically placed around the planet. These hubs are the key to their operations. They extract energy, restructure your biosphere, and support the spread of their influence. Destroy these hubs simultaneously, and the Yes invasion collapses. Rich's mind raced. Simultaneously? That's a tall order. Even if we could coordinate that, how are we supposed to reach all 4 hubs in time? The tip raised a hand, and a holographic map of Earth appeared between them. glowing faintly. 4 points were marked, one deep in the Pacific Ocean, another in the heart of Africa, a third in the Arctic, and the last in South America. The locations were remote and challenging, each hub buried within the alien structures. These hubs are heavily defended, the tip continued. However, your world's militaries possess weapons capable of breaching their defenses. Nuclear bombs deployed at each location will disrupt the energy fields powering the terraforming process. But the attacks must be perfectly synchronized. Rich stared at the map, the weight of the task pressing down on him. And if we fail? Failure means assimilation, the tip said simply. The Yes will take control of your planet systems, and your species will become subservient to their needs. There will be no second chance. Humanity's arsenal. Rich leaned back, running a hand through his hair. You said we already have what we need. How do you know that? The tip gestured to the hologram, which shifted to display Earth's military assets, missile silos, naval fleets, and air bases. We have observed your planet's defensive structures for years. Your species is more prepared than you realize. Your militaries possess enough nuclear devices to destroy the hubs. Rich's eyes widened. You've been scanning our defenses? Yes, the tip said calmly. It was necessary to assess your potential for partnership. Your defenses are impressive, though underutilized. With proper coordination, they are sufficient to eliminate the Yes presence. Rich exhaled, his mind spinning. And then what? Let's say we pull this off. We destroy the hubs. What happens after that? The tip's glowing eyes brightened slightly. Once the Yes are eliminated, your planet will be elevated. You will no longer be isolated. My people will assist you in building planetary defenses, interstellar communications, and alliances with other civilizations. You will become a superpower among the stars. Rich's jaw tightened. And what's in it for you? Why help us? The tip tilted its head. The Yes are a threat to all life. Their expansion endangers countless worlds, including ours. By aiding you, we ensure their defeat while gaining a valuable ally. Your species has potential that we value. The challenge of coordination. Rich studied the map, his heart pounding. This is going to take more than a few survivors and an alien ally. We're talking about global coordination. Nuclear weapons from different nations, synchronized to the second. We'll need the cooperation of the planet's leaders. Correct, the tip said. But you have an advantage. Your current position atop the wall grants you access to the Yes Communications network. You can use it to broadcast to your world's leaders, showing them the stakes and rallying them to action. And if they don't listen? Rich asked, his voice heavy. They will, the tip said confidently. The Yes presence is already destabilizing your planet. Your leaders will recognize the necessity of action. Rich clenched his fists, his mind racing. We need to move fast. How long do we have before the terraforming process becomes irreversible? 2 Earth weeks, the tip replied. After that, the hubs will achieve full integration, and the planet will no longer support human life. Rich stood, his determination solidifying. Then we don't have time to waste. We'll broadcast the plan, rally the planet, and take down those hubs. Whatever it takes. A new purpose. Later, as the group gathered around him, Rich explained the plan in detail. The enormity of the task wasn't lost on anyone. They were 7 ordinary people, survivors of a plane crash, now thrust into the role of humanity's saviors. We're going to need the world's cooperation, Rich said. But if we pull this off, we'll be the ones who stop the Yes. We'll be the ones who saved Earth. And the ones who take it into the stars, Amy added, her voice filled with awe. Rich nodded. Exactly. This isn't just about survival. It's about evolution. If we succeed, Earth becomes a superpower, a force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. Clara stepped forward, her eyes fierce. And if we fail? Rich's expression hardened. We won't. The tip stepped beside him, its presence calm but commanding. Your species has faced extinction before. You have always endured. This is no different. Together, we will see Earth rise." With that, the group began preparing for their mission, their resolve stronger than ever. They had 2 weeks to save the planet, a task that seemed impossible. But with the tip's guidance and humanity's determination, they believed they could defy the odds. The future of Earth and its place among the stars depended on. Chapter 14. The Weight of Leadership. The week crawled by, each passing day tightening the knot in Rich's stomach. He wasn't nervous because Earth's technology wasn't up to the task. He was nervous because it was. The planet had enough firepower to take out the Yes hubs, if only he could find a way to access it. But that was the problem. He was just one man, surrounded by 6 other survivors, none of whom had ever held more authority than a middle management job or a classroom full of students. Now, they were supposed to coordinate a global military strike. It felt impossible. Rich sat at the edge of the viewing room, staring out at the alien fortress beyond the wall. The tip stood silently nearby, its glowing eyes watching him intently. "You doubt yourself," the tip said, its voice calm but pointed. Rich glanced over, his jaw tightening. "Wouldn't you? I'm nobody. I don't have the connections to pull to get the military hardware we need. And even if I could somehow convince the world's leaders to listen to me, there are fail-safes on those weapons codes, security protocols. How do I get them to operate when we need them to?" The tip tilted its head, its glowing patterns pulsing faintly. "Your world is fractured, yes, but you underestimate the unifying power of survival. When the stakes are extinction, even the most divided people can come together." Rich rubbed his temples. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to convince dozens of governments to hand over their most powerful weapons to a group of random people." The tip stepped closer, its presence imposing but steady. "You are not random. You are chosen by circumstance, yes, but also by capability. Your position here, atop the wall, grants you access to the Yes Communications network. Use it. Broadcast your message. Show the world what is at stake." The plan to broadcast. Rich stood, pacing as he thought it through. Even if we could broadcast a message, how do we get them to believe us? The wall, this fortress, it's beyond anything people have ever seen. Some might think it's a hoax. Others will see it as a threat and double down on their divisions. The tip raised a hand and a holographic display appeared, showing Earth's major cities. The Yes actions are already causing destabilization, floods, earthquakes, and atmospheric shifts. Your planet's leaders know something is happening. They simply do not understand it. Show them the truth. Show them the hubs, the Yes machines, and the workers. They will listen. Rich stopped pacing, his mind racing. We'll need proof. Visuals of the hubs, the terraforming evidence that we're not just making this up. Amy, who had been listening quietly nearby, stepped forward. "We already have the tip. If the world sees a real alien standing beside us, they'll have to take us seriously." Rich considered this, nodding slowly. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. We'll need to craft the message carefully, show the threat, but also the solution." The tip's glowing eyes brightened slightly. "And the solution is clear. You must deliver the message and unify your planet's resources. If you can do this, the Yes will fall." Gathering the tools. The group spent the next few days planning their broadcast. With the tip's help, they accessed the Yes communication systems, using their technology to amplify the signal across the globe. Every government, military, and civilian network would receive the transmission. Rich stood before the camera, his face pale but resolute. Amy adjusted the makeshift lighting, while Clara checked the recording equipment. The tip stood beside him, its presence both comforting and unnerving. "This is it," Rich said, taking a deep breath. "If this doesn't work—" "It will," Amy said firmly. "It has to." Rich nodded, then turned to face the camera. The red light blinked on, and he began to speak. To the people of Earth, my name is Rich Walker, and I am speaking to you from the top of the wall you've seen rise, the wall that separates us from what's happening on the other side. On the other side of this wall, an alien species known as the Yes is terraforming our planet. They are reshaping Earth for their own purposes, stripping it of everything that makes it ours. They are using human workers to build their machines, and if we do not act now, humanity will become nothing more than slaves to their empire. Rich paused, his hands tightening into fists. But there is hope. We have identified 4 hubs, key structures that power the Yes terraforming process. If we destroy these hubs, we can stop the invasion and save our planet. We have the technology. All we need is unity. The camera panned to the tip, its glowing eyes fixed on the lens. I am of the Tassis Interplanetary, it said, its voice echoing through the broadcast. I have come to assist your species in defeating the Yes. Your planet has the potential to rise as a galactic superpower, but only if you act. Time is short. The choice is yours. Ascend or be assimilated. Rich stepped back into the frame, his voice steady. We need the world's militaries to coordinate their efforts. We need nuclear devices deployed to the hubs, and we need them deployed simultaneously. This is not a hoax. This is not a drill. This is humanity's last stand. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze unwavering. The fate of the Earth depends on us. Together, we can win. The waiting game. The broadcast went live, reaching every corner of the globe. Then came the waiting. Hours passed, each second stretching unbearably as the group monitored the communication systems for a response. Finally, a signal came through. A military official from the United States appeared on the screen, his expression grave. We've seen your broadcast. We're mobilizing. You'll have our cooperation. One by one, other nations responded. China, Russia, India, Brazil, each pledging their support. The world's leaders, faced with undeniable proof, were finally coming together. Rich let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We're doing it, he said, his voice filled with relief and disbelief. We're actually doing it. Amy placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling faintly. It's only the beginning. Now we have to make it count. As the global effort began to take shape, the group prepared for the final phase of their mission. The weapons were being readied, the teams were being mobilized, and the countdown to humanity's greatest battle had begun. The fate of Earth and the legacy of its 7 unexpected leaders hung in the balance. Chapter 15, The Countdown. Rich paced back and forth in the command room atop the wall, his hands shaking despite his newfound confidence. It still felt surreal. 7 people, a single alien ally, and the cooperation of the world's most powerful governments, all coming together for one purpose: the annihilation of the Yes invasion. The tip commander stood in the center of the room, its glowing eyes fixed on the holographic display. The Earth's map shimmered with activity, showing troop movements, evacuations, and the preparations at the 4 detonation points: the central United States, the heart of Brazil, the Central African Republic, and deep within Russia. These locations weren't random. They were the nerve centers of the Yes grid, as determined by the tip's advanced scans. You seem tense, Rich, Amy said, stepping beside him. Her green eyes, once full of fear, now shone with determination. You've gotten us this far. The world's listening to you. Rich let out a dry chuckle. I know. That's what terrifies me. The stakes of unity. It was a miracle the governments had agreed at all. When the broadcast had gone live, Rich had expected chaos, infighting, doubt, and resistance. And at first, that's exactly what happened. Some leaders questioned the legitimacy of the tip's presence. Others balked at the idea of handing over their nuclear arsenal to a civilian. But as more evidence came in, satellite images of the Yes hubs, the strange energy patterns detected from space, and the undeniable effects of the terraforming, nations began to fall in line. The United States had been the first to commit, its leaders recognizing the existential threat. Brazil followed shortly after, then Russia, and finally the Central African Republic. It wasn't easy. Entire cities had to be evacuated, and the logistical challenges of transporting nuclear devices to such precise locations were immense. Yet, somehow, the pieces were falling into place. "We've done our part," Amy said. "Now it's up to the governments to move the bombs into position. You can't control everything, Rich." "I know," he said softly, staring at the countdown on the hologram. "But if something goes wrong, this is all for nothing." The final hours. As the countdown ticked closer to zero, the TIP commander convened the group for a final briefing. The detonations must occur simultaneously at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, it said, its voice calm despite the enormity of the task. The energy release will cascade through the YES grid, disrupting their terraforming systems and neutralizing their operations. Precision is critical. A delay of even 1 second could fail to trigger the chain reaction. Rich nodded. And the fallout? What happens to the people in those regions? The TIP's glowing patterns flickered slightly. There will be casualties, as with any nuclear detonation. However, the affected zones have been chosen to minimize loss of life while maximizing effectiveness. Your leaders are coordinating evacuations as we speak. Clara frowned, her arms crossed. And what if this doesn't work? What if the YES have a backup plan? The TIP turned its gaze to her. There is always risk. But this plan has the highest probability of success. Without it, your planet will be fully assimilated within days. The room fell silent. The weight of the TIP's words hung over them like a storm cloud. Failure wasn't an option, but success came with its own price. The plan in motion. By the 8-hour mark, reports began pouring in from the field. In the United States, the military had transported the nuclear device to a secure underground location in Kansas. Evacuations of surrounding towns were nearing completion. In Brazil, helicopters buzzed through the air, ferrying soldiers and equipment to a remote jungle site. The dense terrain made progress slow, but the mission was on track. In the Central African Republic, local and international forces worked together to position the bomb in the savannah, coordinating with Russian advisors who had been sent to assist. In Russia, the device had already been positioned in Siberia, a region remote enough to avoid significant civilian casualties. Rich monitored the updates obsessively, his heart pounding with every report. The TIP, for all its calmness, seemed to sense his unease. "Your people are resourceful," it said. "They will not fail." "Let's hope you're right," Rich muttered. The countdown. As the final hours ticked by, the team grew restless. Amy and Clara double-checked the communications equipment, ensuring the detonation codes could be sent without delay. Way pored over the TIP's calculations, searching for any errors or oversights. Ethan kept his focus on the evacuation reports, offering what little comfort he could to the group. At the 2-hour mark, a new report came in. The devices were in position, and the countdown was synchronized across all 4 locations. The world was holding its breath. Rich turned to the TIP. "What happens after? If we succeed?" The TIP's glowing eyes brightened. "If you succeed, your planet will be free of the YES. The wall will collapse, and my people will assist you in rebuilding. You will have earned your place among the galactic powers. And if we fail?" The TIP didn't answer immediately. When it spoke, its tone was heavier than usual. "If you fail, the YES will complete their assimilation. Your species will not perish, but it will no longer be your own." The final moments. At the 10-minute mark, the team gathered around the console, their eyes fixed on the countdown. "This is it," Rich said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "We've done everything we can. Now we see if it's enough." Amy placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, we've made it this far. That's more than anyone could have expected." As the clock hit 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the detonation sequence initiated. Across 4 continents, the Earth shook as nuclear fire tore through the YES hubs. The energy cascaded through the grid, racing toward its final conclusion. The world held its breath as the sky lit up with fire and light. And then silence. The aftermath. The tip turned to Rich, its glowing eyes brighter than ever. It is done. The yes grid is no more. Rich exhaled, his legs giving out beneath him as the weight of the moment hit. Around him, the team erupted in cheers and tears, the realization of their victory sinking in. But Rich wasn't celebrating yet. Is it over? Are they gone? The tip nodded. Yes, your planet is free. And now, your people must rebuild. You have earned your place among the stars. Rich looked out at the alien fortress beyond the wall, its glow fading as the yes influence collapsed. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of hope. Earth had survived, and now it was time to rise. Chapter 16, The New Dawn. The cheers of victory were short-lived. As the fires of the yes hubs died down and the world began to grasp what had just happened, the weight of the moment settled heavily on Rich and his team. They had done what no one thought possible. Coordinated the defense of Earth, unified its fractured governments, and defeated an alien invasion that had threatened to end humanity as they knew it. But as they stood together atop the wall, staring out at the alien fortress beyond, the reality of their new position began to dawn on them. A world reborn. Reports began flooding in from around the globe. The yes machines had gone silent, their influence evaporating as the hubs were destroyed. The alien structures on the other side of the wall crumbled, dissolving into inert material that began to sink back into the Earth. The terraforming process had stopped, leaving the planet scarred but intact. Yet, amidst the relief and celebration, something unprecedented began to happen. Leaders from every nation reached out, not to reclaim power, but to pledge their allegiance to the 7 individuals who had saved the planet. The first message came from the President of the United States, his voice steady but reverent. Rich Walker and his team have shown us what humanity is capable of. Their leadership transcended borders, ideologies, and differences. In light of this, the United States pledges its full cooperation and support to them as the rightful leaders of this new era. Similar messages poured in from Russia, China, Brazil, the United Kingdom, and countless others. Nations that had been at odds for decades now found common ground in the faces of the 7 heroes who had saved them all. Rich stared at the stream of messages on the holographic display, his mouth dry. "They want us to lead," he said, barely above a whisper. Amy placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression a mix of pride and disbelief. "We already were rich. They're just making it official now." The weight of leadership. The team gathered in the command room, their faces lit by the fading glow of the holographic display. Clara broke the silence, her voice heavy with emotion. "I can't believe this. We're just regular people, teachers, engineers, survivors. And now we're supposed to run the world?" Wei shook his head, his tone tinged with irony. "We didn't ask for this, but here we are. We've already done the impossible. Maybe we can figure this out too." Rich leaned against the console, his hands gripping the edge as he tried to process it all. "This isn't just about Earth anymore," he said. The tip said it themselves. This was our moment to prove ourselves. We're not just leading the planet. We're representing humanity to the galaxy. Amy nodded, her voice steady. "And we can't do it alone. The governments of the world are still here. The people are still here. We're not replacing them. We're guiding them." The Galactic perspective. As the team discussed their next steps, the tip commander entered the room, its glowing eyes scanning the group. "Your planet has passed its test," it said. The yes invasion was not just an attack. It was a measure of your resilience, your ingenuity, and your capacity for unity. You have proven yourselves worthy. Rich straightened, his voice firm. "Worthy of what?" The tip gestured toward the window, where the alien fortress was now dissolving into the landscape. "Worthy of joining the galactic community. You are no longer isolated. Other civilizations will take notice of what has happened here. Some will seek to ally with you. Others may not. Amy frowned. What does that mean for us? Are we safe now? The tip's patterns pulsed faintly, almost like a sigh. Safety is relative. The galaxy is vast and filled with both allies and adversaries. The yes are not the only threat you will face. But you are no longer alone. My people will guide you as you establish your place among the stars. Rich nodded, determination hardening in his expression. What's the next step? The tip's glowing eyes brightened. You will begin by establishing planetary defenses. Your world must be prepared for any future threats. And you will send emissaries to other worlds, building alliances and learning from those who have walked this path before you. The new era. The team spent the next hours drafting their initial plans. They would work with the world's governments to rebuild what had been damaged and establish a unified planetary defense force. The tip offered its technology and expertise, promising to aid in humanity's transition to a galactic superpower. As the first light of dawn broke across the wall, Rich stood with Amy, gazing out at the horizon. The world below was still raw from the battle, but there was a sense of hope in the air, a feeling that humanity's darkest hour had passed, and a brighter future was within reach. Do you think we're ready for this? Amy asked quietly. Rich didn't answer immediately. He looked at the scarred landscape, the remnants of the alien fortress, and the faint glimmers of life returning to the planet. I don't know, he admitted, but we weren't ready for the yes either, and we beat them. We'll figure this out one step at a time. Amy smiled faintly. And now the galaxy knows who we are. Rich nodded. Yeah, they do. Let's make sure they don't forget. As the sun rose higher, the team prepared to leave the wall and begin the next chapter of humanity's story. They were no longer just survivors. They were leaders, ambassadors, and defenders of Earth. And while the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The future of humanity had never looked brighter. Thanks for making it to the end. Please like and subscribe so you will be notified when we visualize our next novel. See you next time.